I don't remember how old I was when I got it, but it was beautiful. It was red with black handlebars and chrome wheels and yellow lettering. It had rubber grips and a pad across the handlebar and on the top crossbar of the frame. I loved that bike. I bet I rode it probably 1,000 miles on Maple Street between 9th and 10th, just in that one block. Up and down and up and down and up and down. And so it didn't stay beautiful very long. The sun quickly faded the padding and it began to fall off, and a spill on the road here and there had scratched up the paint. A few crashes, some unintentional and some actually intentional daredevil style crashes had messed up the grips and cracked and loosened the front reflector, and my carelessness of leaving it in the yard left it to a rusty chain and a rusty seat post. And it was also my carelessness that led to my heartbreak. Because I came home from school on a spring afternoon and I decided to go out for a ride, and I went out to the front yard to get my bike, but I couldn't find it. I figured Dad might have picked it up and put it on the carport, but I couldn't find it there either. I checked the sheds in the backyard. It was nowhere to be found. My bike had been stolen. And I don't remember if I cried about it, to be honest, but it's quite likely because I do remember the hurt that I felt. I remember the anger I felt towards whatever low-life scum had taken my bike. I even had a lineup of kids in my class that might have had the gall to do it, including the bully down the street, but it just wasn't a very good feeling at all. Maybe that's what stopped me. I was invited to play over at my next-door neighbor's house, and in his living room, he dumped a bunch of toys out onto the floor, and there were all kinds of action figures on the ground. There were the Star Wars toys that you probably shouldn't have played with that would have probably funded his retirement now. There were G.I. Joe action figures, and there were various and sundry unidentified little men, little action figures, all over the floor. And it was one of the unidentifiable toys that caught my attention. It was a small character, maybe a devil or an elf or something like that, but it wasn't the character that caught my eye, it was his accessory. You know, many of these action figures came with accessories. They had weapons or tools or clothing or whatever, and this particular figure had a 3-inch tall pitchfork. I don't know why I liked the pitchfork, but I did. I liked it very much. I looked at the plethora of toys strewn across the carpet, and I recalled the warning my mother would give me when I dumped out all my toys on the floor in a similar fashion. She would tell me that to be careful because it would be very easy for us to lose a small piece of a toy, and my younger siblings might find them and choke on them. In fact, I'm sure, even though my siblings didn't choke on them, I certainly had lost little pieces of toys this way in the past. And it was that warning that actually set my plan into action. I figured that if I took that pitchfork, that I would never be a suspect, because the small pieces like that, they get lost all the time. So at the opportune time, I picked up the pitchfork and I closed my fist around it and concealed it. I began to plan my escape, as it were. I wanted to leave with that pitchfork in my hand. I thought I probably would put it on my shelf or something and just have it up because it was really cool. I really liked it, and I had my plan, but my heart started to beat fast. I had never done anything like this before, and I started to get nervous. But it wasn't my nervousness that had my biggest effect on me. It was the thought of my friend looking for the pitchfork and not being able to find it. Surely that figure wouldn't be the same without the pitchfork, and maybe, just maybe, my friend would feel a little like I did when I lost my bike. And so I abandoned my plan. It's good. You should be happy to know your preacher's not a thief, at least not in this sense of the word. I abandoned my plan, and I nonchalantly just dropped the pitchfork back into the pile of stuff, and we continued to play. I suppose that feeling should be enough motivation to obey the 8th commandment. We find it in Exodus chapter 15, or 20, verse 15, you shall not steal. And the truth about stealing is it oftentimes carries with it a very real feeling of violation, that if someone steals something from you, particularly if it's something you cherish or honor or have worked hard to get in your life. You're hurt, you're angry. It's right at the pit of your stomach, and it just makes you mad and sad at the same time because you're missing whatever that object was. And so that feeling is there. It's a feeling of violation. If we truly love someone as we love ourselves, as the Bible tells us to do, then we won't want to put somebody through that feeling. But as is the case with each of the 10 commandments, there is something deeper here. So today I want to follow a similar path in which we've explored other commandments. I want to talk about what fits under the umbrella of this commandment. I want to talk about why this is important to God, and I want to talk about how we can better obey this commandment in our lives. First of all, let's talk about what this commandment is about. Merriam-Webster.com says that stealing is taking something that does not belong to you that you are not authorized to have. That's a pretty simple, clear definition, that we are just not to take something that's not ours and we don't have authorization to take. Otherwise, it's stealing if we take something that's not ours. And so what I want to do here is I want to rephrase this command into some specifics. I want to give you some specific things that are included in this commandment that are a little more specific than the broad idea of you shall not steal. Now, the first one, you shall not physically take something that you aren't authorized to take. Okay, that's the easy one. That's the simple one. That means that you are not to get a gun and go into a convenience store and steal the money out of their cash register. Okay, in case anybody was confused about that. All right. And you're not supposed to break into somebody's home in the middle of the night and take their TV. That's against God's will as well. It's not something we should do. We should not steal, so you should not physically take something that you aren't authorized to take. But here are some others that maybe you don't think of quite as often. You shall not take a salary that you didn't earn. Now, this can mean a couple of things. It can mean the quantity of work that you put in or the quality of work, depending on what your job is. That you are hired to accomplish a job, and whether that means you get paid by the hour to work hard during that time, or whether you get paid for the job, if you don't put the work in, if you don't complete the job in quantity and quality, then really what you're doing is you're stealing from your employer. If you're not giving them what they're paying for you to do. There's another side of that, though. If you're the employer, you shall not pay a salary less than someone deserves. You should not pay less than what somebody deserves for the work that they're doing. You know, I think that there's a tendency sometimes to kind of want to lowball, get it as cheap as we can for business owners and for people who have employees, and we're not to do that. According to what God's word says, we should pay people what they're worth. Here's another one. You shall not take advantage of someone's weakness. I don't know if you remember where you were on on 9/11 and what happened then. I'm sure you probably do, and how the towers were attacked and everything that went on with that. But I was to go teach a computer class. At the time, I was a youth minister in Tologa, Oklahoma, and I had to teach a computer class at a VOTEC in the nearby Alva where I grew up, about 65 miles away. And I needed gas on this day. And so I get in my car, and I knew that I needed to go get gas, and I can't remember what the price of gas was per gallon before on September 10th, but I did take note that every gas station in the town had raised it from $1.50 a gallon to $4.50 to $6 a gallon. And there was no reason to do that. It was just this idea that, there's panic and people are, and not only that, but the crazy thing is that people were lined up to fill their cars up with gas at $4 a gallon or whatever it was at the time. And that was taking advantage of this fear, of this panic in the country. There's another thing that I think is not good, according to what God says. It's these places that give payday loans. To give you a loan for a certain amount of time with just extraordinary interest on it. And the reason they do that is because they know these people, that people who use payday loan places, don't have any other option. And so I think it's wrong, frankly. I think it's wrong to charge all that interest for something. Now, I understand the idea of good business, and I get that, but to charge that kind of thing to prey on a particular demographic of people is not, it's not right. Here's another one. You shall not work the system. Let me tell you what I mean by that. There's a lot of different examples. And I'll tell you, this command in the last probably 8 years has been one of the most redefining in my life, because I started to take God's stewardship very seriously, and I understood that stewardship meant not just what I give on Sunday morning, but my entire use of the money that God's blessed me with. And we're going to talk a little bit more of that in a little while. But one of the things I decided not to do anymore that we used to do is we used to go to McDonald's or Burger King or whatever where the kids would want to go to. Sorry about that. And what we would do is we would get dollar menu stuff, and then we would all get one soda. And you know what we'd do? We'd share that drink. And you know when we were out? Got a free refill. And so we'd give 5 people the drink from that one soda cup. And I can see the look on your face that some of you have done the same thing as well. And I realized I finally put a stop to that. I said, no, honey, this is not what, it's free refill. And you know what? If I sit in there personally and I drink 12 Dr. Peppers, I'm okay with that. But to have 12 Dr. Peppers among 5 people, that's something a little different. That's working the system for my own benefit. And I believe, honestly, I came to the point where it sounds silly, but I kind of think I was stealing there. So from now on, we just all get water. No, I'm just kidding. Here's another one. You shall not cheat on your taxes. And all God's people said, shut up. It's very easy to do. It's very easy to do. It's taking money under the table or not reporting something or over-reporting something or whatever the case may be. But Jesus said that we should give to the government what is entitled to the government. Now, you may think taxes are too high or you shouldn't have to pay them. That's fine. You can have that opinion, but as long as that's the law, we are obligated by Scripture to pay and to be fair in those situations. Now, those are some of the material, tangible things that we talk about in regards to stealing. But here are some other ones that aren't exactly monetary or physical in nature. You shall not take credit for something you didn't do. This can be in the workplace, okay? You know, if somebody else did a good job and you take the credit so it lifts your own reputation up or that sort of thing. I'll tell you, one of the things that I learned early on in graduate school, both master's and my PhD work, is that plagiarism is a no-no. That if you plagiarize, you will get kicked out of school. That's why citations are so important, because they don't want you to put somebody else's work across as your own work. One of the things you've heard me say throughout this series probably is J.D. Greear says. You've ever heard me saying that a couple times? Or Tony Evans has said. And the reason I do that is because those two guys have had sermon series on the 10 Commandments that were very good. And they've sparked a lot of the things that you've heard here on Sunday morning. And I didn't want you to think that some of the great ideas that Tony Evans had were actually my ideas. I want you to know where that really came from. So you shall not take credit for something you didn't do. Here's another one. You shall not manipulate someone emotionally for your own gain. You shall not manipulate them for your own gain. Husbands and wives, pay attention. I also think about it in a dating relationship. I'll tell you one of the worst cases I ever saw. And I may have shared this story before, but when I was in youth ministry many, many years ago, I had a girl come to me in tears. And I said, what's the matter? What's going on? She goes, I need to talk to you. And we went into my office and we talked about what was going on and what had happened. And what had happened is that this girl was not one of the in-crowd girls. She wasn't one of the popular girls. And one of the guys that was in the in-crowd came to her and said to her, if you will have sex with me, I will be your boyfriend. And she bought it. And this was a good girl that had been manipulated and by the way, of course, you know what happened, right? It happened, and then he never, ever talked to her again. That's sin. That's stealing from someone if we manipulate someone emotionally for our own gain. And by the way, it doesn't have to be that extreme either. We know how we can do that on a day-to-day basis as well. Here's another one. You shall not steal from God. This is one of those preachers are scared to talk about. But if you look at Malachi, what God says to the Israelites is that when you do not bring your tithe into the storehouse, you are robbing God. You're stealing from God. And we've talked about before how the tithe is not a legalistic command in the New Testament, but everything in the New Testament exceeds the Old Testament. And so when we don't give to God what God deserves or what He's calling us to give, then we are actually stealing from God. Here's some more from the positive standpoint. You shall give the time to your family that they deserve. In this world, I think it's very easy because of jobs and hobbies and things of that nature, for that to go by the wayside. I've actually had a conversation with people before, not in this church, but in the last church I was at, where the man told me, he said, I don't feel bad about never spending time with my kids because they have anything they want, materially. And that was not a good thing. That's robbing time from your family. Another one, you shall be more than fair in business dealings. I tell you what, this was a tough one for me. My mom is a lovely lady. I hope she's not watching this right now, or she's not watching it now, but won't watch it later on the internet. My mom's a lovely lady, but she is the master of getting a deal at garage sales. I remember her going and there was a $40 baby toy of some sort, and she got it for 50 cents. I don't know how she did it. Maybe she had a gun. I don't know. But this is the thing. And for my mom, it's also part of the game, you know. It's going to the garage sale, and even though it's marked this, it doesn't matter. You don't ever pay full price for anything at a garage sale if you're my mom, okay? And so I kind of grew up in this idea that then you go home and you brag about the deal. You know, I got this for whatever. And so, this idea of getting it at the least amount you can has been a part of my life all my life. And I tell you what, I got pretty good at it too. There were a couple of times where I ended up getting something that was worth a lot more than what the person thought it was, and I ended up getting a great, great deal. But what I've come to realize is that God calls us and expects us to be more than fair in business dealings. I've been in the market for furniture. We have old, crappy furniture in our house, and so I was looking for a little bit less old, less crappy furniture. So I was searching Facebook, and I found I found a couch and I found a chair. And my recliner has been through everything and back. And it's disgusting, and it's worn down. It's so comfortable, but that's another thing. Carrie says it can't stay in my living room any longer, okay, unless I cover it up with something. And so I was looking for a recliner, a Lazy Boy recliner. And I found one on Thursday on Facebook, on one of the buy, sell, trade pages. And they had this price on it. It says it's brand new, and you know how it's brand new, right? Okay. So I called the guy and talked to him a little bit. He says, it really is brand new. And I said, well, I'll give you I think I offered him about 25% less than what he was asking for it. Okay. That seems reasonable, but you can't always take the asking price. And then he said, I'll tell you what, man, he told me this story. His wife's grandfather had gotten a divorce, bought all new furniture for their house, put it in a room, stayed in one room while he lived there, and just not that long after that, he passed away. And so this literally had come off the truck from Howell's a month ago and never had anybody sit in it. And so I'm on my way to go do this, and he said, and actually he renegotiated and said, okay, I'll give you. We met in the middle. I said, great deal. And so basically, I was going, and I was going to, and I had studied for this sermon that day. God, why would you do this to me? And so what I did is when I got there, I told Carrie, I got the asking price in cash. And I told Carrie, I said, if it's really new, if it is in the condition he says, I'm going to go ahead and pay full price for that. Because I think we should be more than fair. And by the way, he agreed to a price. It wasn't like it was something that I was stealing it or whatever. He agreed to a price, but I felt like we need to be more than fair in our business dealings. There's been a couple times where I've bought some tools from friends, and they'll say, give me $75 for them, and I'll give them $100 because I know how much it's really worth. And I'm not saying that to say, hey, look how awesome I am, but it's just something I've been convicted about, that we are to be more than fair in our business dealings. Here's another one. You shall be aware how your purchases affect people. Okay. I don't have time to truly talk about the full extent of this, but here's something we really need to understand as Christians. That what we buy affects so much beyond just what we spend on that shirt or pants or TV or phone or whatever the case may be, okay? And what I mean by that is that part of the reason why some goods are so cheap and why you can buy a t-shirt for $2.50 brand new, is that oftentimes those goods are made under suspicious circumstances. That are made under circumstances that are perhaps illegal, but if nothing better than that, they're simply made by people who do not follow the earlier command of paying an honest day wage to someone. And because they know that in these third world countries where our shirts and our pants and our phones and that sort of thing are being made, they know that there's no other options out there for jobs, that they choose to have cheap labor. And by the way, because our people, business people in this country are looking at that bottom line and they want to outsource to the cheapest place they can find it. And so what happens, if we're not careful, if we're not aware, the things that we buy will contribute to poverty and injustice across this world. And so we got to be aware of how our purchases affect people. Here's a website. I want you to write this down or take a picture of it or whatever, memorize it and go home and try it out. Some of you maybe already have, but it's called madeinaFreeworld.com. And that website has a whole bunch of resources about fair trade, about justice-type based things that are made, clothing and that sort of thing. And there's also one other activity on there I really would encourage you to do. And my wife is very passionate about this. I got this website from her, but there's something called a slavery footprint. And what it does is you enter your household goods that you have, and it tells you how many slaves likely were used in the making of those goods. Carrie, what was ours? You remember? 80-something just for our house. It's something we should be aware of, church. It's something we really should be aware of, to understand that we are not isolated in this country, and that the things we do, the decisions we make, the purchases we make affect other people in this world, even brothers and sisters in Christ. So go to that website and check it out and go through there and just learn and see some of those things. But the last one here, I think, you shall share the good news of Jesus. I know you always hear me say that, but that's true. And I think back to the story in the Old Testament where there's a siege on Jerusalem and the beggars go. You remember hearing me telling this story before? And they find that the people, the enemy's camp was empty. They took off and ran. God got rid of them. And they went over there and they saw food and clothing and gold and all this kind of stuff. And they're eating their stuff. And then all of a sudden they stop and they say, this is not right for us to keep it to ourselves. And so the good news that we have, the gospel, the idea that we've got of God's kingdom that we didn't get from ourselves, that came from Christ, the faith that we can have in the new, full lives that God has intended for us is not something we should keep from others. Otherwise, we're stealing that opportunity for them to have that full life as well. So these are just a few examples of what following this commandment entails, but simply put, God expects to not take or keep what belongs to someone else. That if it belongs to someone else, we should not mess with it. It's not ours to take. But I want to talk for a moment about why this is so important to God, particularly in the physical and material sense of this commandment in regards to stealing. Let me remind you of the number one reality that should affect every aspect of the financial and material outlook of Christ followers, and it's this, that God is the owner of everything. That's the number one priority or number one reality, truth that we need to keep in mind as we consider how we use finances and how we view our finances. Here's some Bible verses to show you that. Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Psalm 50:10 through 12. For every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains, and the creatures of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all that is in it. That's God speaking. Colossians 1, verse 16. For by him, God, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and him hold all things together. Deuteronomy 10, verse 14. To the Lord your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth, and everything in it. 1 Chronicles 29:11. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and power and glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, O Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. And I hope that you can see there's not a lot of wiggle room there. That pretty well everything is God's. Oh, it might have your name on the bank account, or your name on the deed, or your name on the title, but it's still God's. It all came from God, which is our next point. The effect of that reality brings in this reality that everything we get comes from God. Look at what 1 Corinthians 4:7 says. For who makes you different than anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why did you boast as though you did not? Deuteronomy 8 verse 17 says, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your forefathers as it is today. And what these verses tell us is that everything we get comes from God, and even the things that we earn with our own hands and minds in our jobs still come from God, because it's God who gave us the ability to do those things. That changes things a bit, okay? But then we have to address the question that you might have in your mind right now. Is it why do some people get more from God than others? Right? Why is Bill Gates and Chris Beard? Why is there such a disparity there? Why is that the case? Well, there's a couple of verses that we can look at. First of all, Matthew chapter 5, verse 45. The second part of that, he says, he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. In other words, God blesses everybody. He loves us all, and it's not what we get and receive is not based on how good we are in his eyes. It's not based on whether if that was the case, then everybody that was a Christian and Christ follower would be the ones that are loaded, and everybody else would be poor, right? That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Here's another verse. There's a parable of talents in Matthew 25. What happens there is that, it just says right here, verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability, and he went on his journey. And all this, by the way, he's talking about how these talents of money, which is an amount of money, he gives it to the people, he leaves, and he expects them to use that money to gain more money, to use what they've been given to create more. And so the question is, though, is that why did God divvy up the money like he did? 5, 2, and 1. Now, verse 15 says it was according to the ability of the servants, but why didn't the master just give every servant an equal share to see what they could do? Well, as frustrating as it might be, there is really no better answer to the question of why some people receive more from God than the fact that God is God and I am not. That God can pretty much do what God wants to do because he's God, and his ways are higher than my ways. I'm not going to understand his reasoning. Even though I might pray, Lord, if you just let me win the lottery, I pray I'll be generous to others. It's a lot better if I win the lottery, Lord, because I will give to others. Those people might just spend it on yachts and stuff. I'll only buy 1 yacht and spend the rest on giving. I don't know what the answer is, but the answer is God does something in his wisdom. He divvies up the wealth. He gives the blessings, physical and material blessings, based on something he knows and we don't. So follow me here now. God owns everything. Everything we get comes from God, and God distributes as he sees fit. So now let's bring it back to stealing. That means 2 things happen when we steal. First of all, we don't honor God's wisdom. What we're doing when we steal is we're saying that God made a mistake in his distribution. That they shouldn't have got that TV, I should have got that TV, and so because I know better than God, I am going to take that TV for myself. Or it's not fair that I don't have this, and they do, and so I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And basically what we do in that instance is we call God a fool. Or let's go back to the other things too. If we say we work the system or get a great deal that really isn't all on the up and up, it's not more than fair. Or if we cheat on our taxes, then what we're saying is that, God, you didn't really know what you were talking about. And I do. And so I'm going to honor my wisdom instead of yours, God. So that's the first thing that we do. But the second thing is that we don't trust in God's provision. And we do this for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're impatient. You know, one of the reasons why my generation is in so much debt is because we wanted to be like our parents from the moment we graduated high school or college. The houses that took years and years and years and years to buy and pay for my parents is something I wanted right now. The nice stuff that my parents had was something I wanted now, so I get a credit card, and I could go ahead and get all that now, even though I didn't have the money. I remember one time, it was back when we were having some financial problems, and I had to sell my Harley-Davidson motorcycle. And I had a buddy who was an accountant. He was my parents' age, still a friend of mine, and he had a Corvette and a Harley. And I said, Rick, why is it that you get a Corvette and a Harley, and I can't even have a Harley? He said, I've been around a whole lot longer than you have. And there's some wisdom in that. But we don't trust God's timing. We want it now. And so if we don't have it now, then we got to figure out how to get it now. And that's why we don't trust in God's provision. But the second thing is that we're not content. We're not content with what God has given us. We're not satisfied with what God provides. We say, God, I don't have enough, and so I got to do something to gain more. So you see, what happens is that if we start seeing who is really behind the distribution of material possessions, then it changes our outlook. If we start seeing who really is responsible for us having what we have and what each other having what we have, then it really changes our outlook. First of all, let me say this. About the same time that my bike got stolen, I was losing my baby teeth. And as was the custom, I would put a tooth under my pillow, and during the night, the you-know-what would come to my house and leave a quarter or two under my pillow. But the problem is that with young children, losing teeth and money is that they are all very good conversation pieces for school. And so we started comparing stories about how we lost our teeth. This person tied a string around it and put it to the doorknob and closed it. One guy dad got a pair of pliers and pulled it out. One guy just lost it in an apple, whatever the case may be. Those are good stories to compare. But they also talked about how much money the you-know-what left. That was not such a good thing. Because it turns out that you-know-what was not very fair at all, at least to me. Because where I was getting a quarter or two, my friends were getting whole dollars, and some of them even $5 bills. Well, of course, this was unacceptable to me. So I went to my dad and I complained. And he gave me some explanation about how maybe they had a different you-know-what or something like that. But of course, this was not acceptable to me either. And so sure enough, just within a couple of days of this conversation, I lost another tooth. And once again, I put my tooth under the pillow, this time with higher hopes and expectations. That maybe now that I was aware of the injustice that was being done by the you-know-what, that the you-know-what would pay more attention to me and distribute the wealth more evenly. Maybe the you-know-what should be a socialist. We'll see how that goes. But what happened is I woke up, and I pulled up my pillow the next morning, and I found 2 measly quarters. And I was livid. I was so mad. I was so mad that when my dad got home from work, I let my frustration rip. I talked about how unfair it was that I got a stingy loser of a you-know-what while my friends were rolling in the dough. And I guess my dad had had enough of my selfishness, because in the middle of my rant, he stopped me and he declared something to the effect of, "Hey, you ungrateful punk, I am the you-know-what." Well, I was devastated. I started crying. And I sobbed, "Why did you tell me that? I didn't want to know that." And I think to this day, my dad told this story about a month ago when I was visiting him, and I think to this day my dad thinks that I was upset because he revealed a childhood mystery to me. But in reality, I think I was upset because I felt bad. Because see, it was very easy for me to rant about an unknown you-know-what and to complain about this being that I had no knowledge of. But when I was met with the realization that the source of my money was actually my father, I felt really bad, because I knew that in my house we didn't have a lot of money. I knew that we didn't have a lot of opportunity that others did, and I realized that my dad, to put 2 quarters under my pillow, was a big deal. I realized how significant the gift was. You see, God said, "Do not steal," because the root of it all is not just the victimization of another human being, which is bad enough, but it's an affront on God. And stealing is just as much of a perspective issue as it is an injustice issue. Stealing is as much about who and what we get our stuff, our blessings from, and what others do as well, as it is to something about taking somebody else's stuff. And so here are some tips. Here are some tips for obeying this commandment in our lives. First of all, trade control for submission. Most of us in this room, I'm guessing, don't have a problem acknowledging that everything is God's and that everything comes from Him. We can read the Bible, we can read the verses I quoted, and you could say, yeah, okay, I get that. That makes sense to me. But most of us do have a problem trusting God, trusting that God knows what is best, particularly in the practical sense. Especially when money and possessions are such a central part of society. When we see those around us that may have more, or maybe even the times where we honestly and legitimately struggle financially, maybe even not by any fault of our own. I tell you what, there are times in my life I'm way better steward than I was 10 years ago. But I still have times where I struggle financially. When bills pile up, when I go to the doctor and it costs more than I expected, all these things happen. And so when that happens in our lives, it's kind of hard to really trust God's provision. But church, we have to decide who is going to be the source of our material blessings. God wants us to depend on Him. He wants us to put all of our trust on Him and His wisdom in our material blessings. Now, certainly, He wants us to use what He's gifted us with to work, to be productive. The Bible definitely talks about working and being productive. But at times, I think we want to take matters into our own hands. That's why, by the way, I just spent $10 on the lottery this last week. I confess to you. Because $292 million sounded pretty good. That I don't have to work for, even. That's why the lottery got up to what? $1 billion recently, or close to it. Because everybody wants that opportunity to get everything without putting something into it. But the truth is that God will not bless us if we don't acquire material possessions in a way that doesn't align with His will. In other words, the things that we get, if we don't get it according to His plan, He's not going to bless it. I learned that a long time ago. That He's not going to bless our efforts. That if we cheat on our taxes, you can expect to continue to struggle. That's not. Sometimes I think in those kind of instances, cheating on our taxes, taking advantage of the system, keeping the change when it's too much at the grocery store, all these different things that we might do, we do it because we think we might be able to get ahead just a little bit. That if I don't give Him my full income on my tax form, that maybe I can take that money and it'll give me the foot up that I need. And the reality is that I think as long as I was doing those sort of things, I kept falling deeper and deeper. Because God's not going to bless the things where we take control and do it under His or under our own expectations or plan of action. But it brings me to the second thing. We need to trade the world's view of material possessions for God's. Church, as I mentioned before, following every commandment really comes back to following the first one, which commands us to not have any other gods in the true God, His space. To have no other gods before the true God. Well, the world has turned material possessions into an idol. We've turned money and stuff into a trophy. He who has the most toys wins, right? Who has the biggest boat, the biggest house, the nicest clothes. That is a status symbol in our society. That's an idol. Maybe turn it into security. That if you have a big 401k, then you feel pretty set. If you have a pretty big bank account, then you don't have to worry too much about need anymore because you've got everything you need. That's an idol. That's depending on something other than God. Sometimes it's a drug. Oh, sorry, ladies. So here we go. If you go to the mall and spend money to feel better about your day, and by the way, I go to Harbor Freight Tools and do the same thing, so. But if we use it to kind of forget about things for a little while, if we spend money to get a rush or to get excitement, especially on things we don't need, then we're probably treating money like a drug. That's an idol. Or even as a god by which we define life, where everything we do is motivated by money or material possessions. But God says that we're not to depend on anything other than Him for glory. That our measurement of success should be based on our work in His kingdom and by what Christ has done for us, not by the stuff we have or the number of our bank account. That we're not to depend on anything other than Him for security. We're not to depend on money or a job or even other human beings for our security. We're to only depend on God. That we're not to depend on anything other than Him for peace. Because you all know, same as I do, that it's fun to buy that new toy, but as soon as that new toy is not new anymore, it's time for the new toy. And it doesn't fill that void. Only God can give us that peace. And that we are to define life by Him and Him alone. And so that means that we must view money and possessions as a tool for God's glory. You've heard me say that before. That God's view of money and possessions is that it should be used as a tool to bring Him glory in His kingdom, to use for His glory. When we view it like that, we're not going to have quite as much of a desire to get things by impure motives. One way we view it in this way, once we view it as a tool, it's easier to make the last trade, to trade selfishness for generosity. Ephesians 4:28 says, "Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands that they may have something to share with those in need." And so, according to the Apostle Paul, here's God's plan and will for us. First of all, don't steal. Okay, we got that one. But not only that, He wants us to work. Okay? But do you notice what He says, the reason that God blesses us with, or the reason we should work? Do you see what it is there? It doesn't say, do something useful with your own hands that you can build up your bank account, or that you can build onto your house, or that you can buy that new car you want. It says, do something useful with their own hands so that they may have something to share with those in need, to bless someone else. You see, that is the key to this command, is that God is calling us to be a blessing. The big issue behind all the commandments, including commandment number 8, is that God wants us to be more and more like Him. And He wants us to reflect Him in our lives. And so our lives shouldn't be controlled or characterized by selfish control and idolatry, but by love. And so as we close today, here's the action step that I want to give you. Because all of us have stolen in one way, shape, or form, whether it be picking up that little 3-inch pitchfork and taking it home with us, or taking somebody's bike, or cheating on our taxes, or filling up the McDonald's cup, or whatever the case may be. We've all been guilty of this in some way, shape, or form. And so here's what I want your action step to be. I want you to do an experiment. I want you to test the teaching of Jesus that the Apostle Paul quotes in Acts 20:35. It is more blessed to give than to receive. I want you to experiment with that a little bit. Maybe buy the person behind you at the drive-thru line Starbucks for them. Maybe sell something you have and give to someone who has a need. But take some time and learn and experience whether or not that is really true or not. And I can promise you, for one thing, it is. But I can promise you that two things are going to happen. That you're going to be more and more obsessed with giving. Let me tell you, I spent most of my early life trying to figure out how I could get. And I would buy that new toy, and I would experience the thrill of that, and it would be fun, and I would try to find the next toy, and so on and so forth. But there's nothing more thrilling and exhilarating than giving to someone. Giving is where that thrill comes from. And I can promise you, it's kind of addictive. It's kind of addictive. So that's the first thing, is you're going to become obsessed with giving. And when we do that, we're going to be more like God. We're going to be more and more like God to the people around us. Because as you know, for God so loved the world, He gave. Let's pray. God, thank You for Your word. Help us to have a spirit of generosity and not selfishness. Help us to take this command very seriously in all aspects of our life. Help us to understand that You are the owner of everything. Help us to give You praise for what You have given us, no matter how insignificant it might seem in the grand scheme of things. Help us to acquire more, not for our own glory, but for Yours as we give to others. I pray that every person in this room will experiment and put your words to the test to see if it truly is better to give than to receive. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to become more and more a giving congregation. I'm so thankful for the spirit of giving that is throughout this place already. But I pray, Lord, you'll grow that. You'll cultivate it. You'll let it spread like wildfire so that we become obsessed with giving and so that we can be more like you in the things that we do. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand and sing.